These stories isn't for the faint-hearted. Proceed only if you dare. It was a quiet night in 2008 when I was 15, home alone with my dog Abby while my parents were out at the casino. Around 11 p.m., I was chatting with friends online and watching videos when Abby started barking furiously at the living room windows. I assumed it was my parents returning, but when I checked, the driveway was empty. The darkness outside made it impossible to see anything, so I dismissed it as noise from the busy main road nearby. But Abby's barking didn't stop. Over the next few minutes, I began hearing strange noises, knocks, rustling, and the unmistakable sound of someone trying to jimmy the basement door open. My heart raced as Abby's growls grew more menacing. She was a gentle black lab, but that night, she sounded like a guard dog ready to attack. Frozen in fear, I finally grabbed the home phone, locked myself in my parents' closet with a gun, and prepared to call 911. Just as I was about to dial, I heard the front door open. Relief washed over me when I realized it was my parents. But the terror of the night wasn't over. The next afternoon, my Uncle Pete showed up at our door. He was always a creepy figure, the kind of person who made everyone uncomfortable. As I eavesdropped from another room, I heard him casually mention, "I tried to stop by last night to drop this off, but no one was home, I guess." My blood ran cold. It was him, the one stomping around the house, trying to break in through the basement. He handed me an envelope with a thank you card and a gift card for helping his daughter with softball lessons. My dad, furious, threatened him and slammed the door. We never spent time with him again. To this day, I'm haunted by questions. What was he thinking? Why did he need to drop off that card so late? And worst of all, what would have happened if he'd gotten inside? Abby's fierce protection that night likely scared him off, but the thought of what could have happened still sends chills down my spines. When I was 22, I decided to rent the downstairs apartment in my parents' house to save money while still having a bit of privacy. It was a decent setup, open layout with a mini kitchen in the living room, a bedroom, bathroom, and laundry room down the hall. There was even a side entrance so I could come and go without bothering my parents. But even though they traveled often, it still felt like I couldn't fully relax or have friends over without feeling watched. That all changed one weekend when my parents were away, and I invited my friends Anthony and Jay over to hang out. We were blasting music, watching hockey, and having a few drinks. By the end of the night, I was buzzed, and my friends decided to crash on the massive couch in the living room. I went to bed, locking my bedroom door out of habit, and fell asleep. A few hours later, I woke up to the sound of footsteps upstairs. I figured it was one of my friends grabbing water from the fridge, so I didn't think much of it. But then I heard it, the sound of my bedroom doorknob twisting. Someone was trying to get in. My heart skipped a beat, but I stayed quiet, hoping they'd go away. Eventually, I fell back asleep. The next morning, Jay was still on the couch, and when I asked if he'd tried to come into my room, he said no, blaming his drunken state for not remembering. I brushed it off, thinking it was nothing. But that night, after a long day out, I heard it again. Footsteps upstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of my doorknob turning. This time, there was a light knock. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my phone and texted everyone I could think of, hoping someone would say it was them. No one replied. I called 911, whispering to the operator as I hid behind my dresser, clutching a blunt object. When the police arrived, they searched the house and found a tall, dirty man hiding under my parents' bed. The look he gave me as they led him away still haunts me. My parents didn't press charges, but I'll never forget that night. Was he there the whole time? Did I leave the door unlocked? I'll never know. Fast forward 5 years, and I thought I'd left that fear behind. I moved to a secluded cabin in rural upstate New York, surrounded by nothing but woods and silence. It was perfect, peaceful, quiet, and far from the chaos of the city. I spent my days fishing on the lake and my nights on the deck, watching the sun set behind the trees. But 2 weeks ago, the peace was shattered. It started with a simple sound, a twig snapping in the distance. I brushed it off as an animal, but the noises grew louder and more frequent. Scratching, tapping, even faint whispers seemed to come from the walls. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. One night, I heard tapping on the spare bedroom window. I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the room, pulling back the curtains to see nothing but the empty woods. But the next night, I saw it, a shadowy figure standing outside the window, barely visible in the moonlight. My heart raced as I called 911. But before they arrived, I heard footsteps inside the house. I bolted out the back door, running through the woods until I saw the flashing lights of the police cars. I haven't gone back since. The cabin still stands, but it's no longer my sanctuary. Whoever was out there, they were waiting for me, and I know they're still out there watching. When my cousin Cody and I were in our early 20s, we went on a handful of camping trips around Colorado. This particular trip happened when I was 22 and Cody was 23, deep in the Uncompahgre forest. It was my first time camping there, but Cody had been before. We chose the middle of the week for our trip to avoid crowds and traffic, a luxury our jobs allowed. Cody, the Eagle Scout, always took charge on these trips, and I was happy to let him. We parked near a picnic area and hiked about 15 minutes into the woods until we found a decent clearing, big enough for 2 tents, a portable stove, and a campfire. We set up camp quickly, with Cody effortlessly pitching his tent in minutes while I struggled with mine for over 20. Once the tents were up, we gathered sticks and wood to build a fire ring. Cody had brought fire starters and a lighter, so we cheated a little, but who cares? As the sun dipped below the trees, we had a roaring fire going, and Cody was grilling steaks and burgers. He always went all out with the food, and I trusted him completely. We cracked open some beers, played classic rock on a portable speaker, and just vibed. There's something magical about sitting around a campfire in the wilderness, sharing stories and laughter with someone you're close to. But the magic didn't last. As we switched to playing Uno, we heard something, a faint humming and the crunch of footsteps in the distance. I paused the music, and the silence that followed was heavy. The humming grew louder, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of someone moving through the woods. Cody urged me to grab the flashlight, but by the time I found it, the sounds had faded. We exchanged uneasy glances. "That's not normal," Cody muttered. "No one should be out here this deep, especially not humming like some creep." We tried to shake it off and went back to our game, but the mood had shifted. Then out of nowhere, a large stick landed in the middle of our campsite. It didn't fall from a tree, it was thrown. Cody yelled into the darkness, "Whoever's out there, get a life!" His voice echoed, but there was no response, just the sound of footsteps retreating into the woods. I suggested we pack up and leave, but Cody insisted it was too dangerous to hike out in the dark. Instead, we decided to take turns keeping watch. Cody took the first shift, promising to stay awake and read his book, while I crawled into my tent and tried to sleep. Waking up in the middle of the night while camping isn't unusual. It's cold, the sleeping bag is uncomfortable, and every little sound can jolt you awake. But this time, it wasn't the cold or the ground that woke me. It was the feeling of being watched. I opened my eyes and saw a head peering into my tent. In my half-asleep state, I thought it was Cody. "Is it my turn?" I mumbled, rubbing my eyes. But as I stared at the shadowy figure, I realized something was off. The head didn't move or speak. Then in a flash, the tent zipper closed and the figure disappeared. I lay there for a moment, my heart pounding, before shooting upright. "Cody!" I called out, but there was no answer. I unzipped my tent and peeked outside. The fire was dead and Cody wasn't there. Panic set in as I rushed to his tent, unzipping it to find him fast asleep in his sleeping bag. My blood ran cold. "Cody, wake up!" I shook him until he stirred. "Someone's here," I whispered, my voice trembling. He grabbed his bear spray and followed me outside, but the campsite was empty. We decided to share his tent for the rest of the night, taking turns keeping watch until dawn. The next morning, we packed up in silence and hiked back to the car. Neither of us wanted to stay another night. It's been 6 years since that trip, and Cody has asked me to go camping a few times since, but I always decline. That experience left me shaken to my core. Who was out there in the woods that night? Why were they watching us? And that head peering into my tent, it still haunts my dreams. People are scarier than any bear or wild animal. I may never go camping again,